Okay, so there was one question from last week that somebody wrote in about verse 307 and saying that here, we're examining our color and shape inherently one or inherently distinct. And of course, they're going to be neither, because they aren't inherently existent at all. But for the person who is asking this question, they're thinking that shape and color and everything else, for that matter, exists by its own characteristics from its own side. And so we're coming back and saying, well, if that's the case, then are color and shape inherently the same thing? Or inherently different. If they were inherently the same thing, then color and shape would be the same thing. You couldn't differentiate them, so you couldn't feel shape with your hands and see color with your eyes, because you would have to be able to feel color with your hands too if you felt shape with your hands, okay? If they were inherently distinct, then they would have absolutely no relationship at all to them. So you could have a patch of color that doesn't have any shape, and you could have a shape that doesn't have any color. Okay, so by analyzing like that, then you see, well, they can't be inherently existent at all. Okay, we have the little kitty under the table again. Very interesting how they all have their own personalities. Maitri wanted her own chair to sit in next to Venerable Tarpa at the teachings, and Venerable Tarpa had to go and get another chair. Yeah, Karuna was trying to escape down the door. She didn't want to come to teachings, and now that we made her be here, she's sleeping. And little Pipsqueak Mudita thinks teachings are a great time to play with everybody. So, you've got to look here, not down there. As I say, as I look down to, where is she? Okay, she's over there. Okay, so that was to finish about verse 307. So just a little bit of review, that we were talking about in 309, that visual consciousness, should, if the elements and the color and shape and pot and different forms that were made of the elements, if all these things existed from their own side, then the visual consciousness should be, if they were inherently one, then the visual consciousness should be able to not only see the pot, but also see all the small particles that were composing it. Okay? So that wouldn't work, and if the object, the pot, and the elements that composed it were inherently different, then the pot wouldn't have any causes. Okay? And again, if they were inherently one, then cause and effect would exist at the same time, which is impossible. Okay? So, okay, so then we ended with what? Which verse?
312.
Okay, 312, that's right. Okay, so, so to 312. So here we're examining what is the agent that is doing the looking at an object, okay? So we're starting off here with the consciousness, and is the consciousness the instrument that is looking at things, okay? So the verse says, because the conditions are incomplete, there is no awareness before looking, while afterwards awareness is of no use. The instrument is of no use in the third case. Okay, so this is refuting consciousness as the agent. So the consciousness being the agent means the consciousness is the one that looks. Okay, so who is looking? There's a color here. Who is what is the thing that is looking at the color that is going to lead to the seeing of the color? Okay, so a visual consciousness cannot look at the color, because if it did, it would exist before seeing the color. Okay? So the visual consciousness doesn't exist before looking at the form, because the conditions for that consciousness don't exist before looking at the form. Okay? Yeah. But if the visual consciousness looks at the color or at the pot after, if the consciousness exists after looking at the pot, then it's really superfluous, because the eye consciousness is of no use in looking at the pot, because looking takes place before that eye consciousness exists. Okay, so so in other words, so what looks at the form? If you say the visual consciousness looks at the form, then, does the visual consciousness exist before looking at the form so that it can see the form? Well, no, because not all the causes and conditions for the visual consciousness exist before looking at the form and seeing the form. Does the visual consciousness look after seeing the form? No, because it's already seen the form, so it doesn't need to look at that time. Okay? So if the visual consciousness is not looking at the pot, what in the world is looking at the pot? Okay, because remember, in the world of inherent existence, you need to pin things down. Yeah, we aren't just talking regular conventional existence, what is looking at the pot. We're talking in the case of if things inherently existed, then you should be able to identify exactly what things are, very specifically, because they would have their own inherent nature that doesn't depend on anything else. Okay, so you see here we can't identify the visual consciousness as the one that looks before the visual consciousness exists, or the one that looks after the visual consciousness exists, because in terms of inherent existence, it couldn't work either way. Okay? And if you think that what looks at the pot and the consciousness are simultaneous, because we just showed they couldn't be before, it couldn't be after. If you think they're simultaneous, then the instrument of looking would be of no use in the arising of the visual consciousness, because the two would exist simultaneously and would be unrelated. Whereas, what looks and the visual consciousness are in a cause and effect sequence, aren't they? Okay, so if they existed simultaneously, they would be unrelated. They couldn't be in a cause and effect sequence. Okay, so the instrument of looking as the cause could not cause the consciousness perceiving the object. Yeah?
It still feels like the first one is possible, because it still feels like the causes exist for the visual consciousness to be there, and then the object bumps into it.
So, okay, so you're saying it seems like the first one could still work because it seems like the causes for the visual consciousness exist and the visual consciousness is there, and then the object bumps into it. Isn't the object one of the causes for the visual consciousness?
Yeah. The preceding moment of visual consciousness.
Yeah, but the preceding moment of visual consciousness could be any type of consciousness. It doesn't have to be a visual consciousness. It's any moment of mind. Yeah. So that visual consciousness cannot exist before looking at the object. Yeah.
The one that sees that object doesn't exist.
Right. But then but it doesn't mean there is a visual consciousness the moment before seeing that object. Because let's say you had your eyes closed, or you were sleeping. Yeah? You open your eyes and there's the visual object. So that object is a cause of that consciousness. So that means the consciousness can't exist before the object does. Yeah? So, but we do feel like the consciousness is there. It's a visual consciousness. That's what's so strange. It's a visual consciousness that isn't seeing anything. But how can you have a visual consciousness that isn't seeing anything? How would you identify it as a visual consciousness if it weren't seeing anything? Yeah? Because an olfactory consciousness isn't seeing anything either. So if you could identify a visual consciousness with that consciousness seeing anything, then you could say the olfactory consciousness was the visual consciousness, because it too isn't seeing anything. Okay, so that's not going to work. Okay, now we're going to ask maybe the eye faculty, the eye sense power, maybe that is the agent that looks at things. Okay, so verse 3:13 says, if the eye travels, that which is distant would take long to see. Why are extremely close and very distant forms not clear? Now here, when it talks about the eye traveling, the way the verse is worded, it really sounds like somehow that eye sense power goes out and touches the object. Now, whether they really believe that or not, I don't know, but it sure sounds like it. Because somehow for contact to occur, the faculty and the object have to have contact. So, in ancient times, they don't know about light rays coming from the object and striking our retina. And so they're probably thinking there has to be some kind of contact. So somehow the visual faculty, touches the object. It travels to the object. But it also is saying the absurdity if the eye travels to look at the visible form. Okay, so Joe Blow says, but the eye is the instrument of looking. So Aryadeva says, when the eye looks at form, okay, does it look after going to the object or without going to the object? Okay, in the first case, that it looks at the form after going to the object, then it should take longer to see distant objects because the eye would have to travel further to get there. But that's not the case. Okay? If the eye perceived through contact, then close objects and distant objects would actually be equally clear, because the eye faculty would contact both of them directly. So this may actually be refuting the idea that the eye travels to the object. It's not totally clear.
Okay. About, there's distance and times. there's a gap between what happens and the time, you know?
Like
Yeah.
stars take a long time for the...
Right. Yeah.
What does it...
Yeah. Can we stay with this here? Yeah. Just for a moment. Okay. So distant objects would be equally clear because the sense organ would touch it, and you would be able to see things closer sooner than you would be able to see things distant, because the eye faculty would touch the close objects sooner than it would touch the distant ones. In terms of modern science, it's a little bit the reverse. The stars that we're seeing, actually they existed, what we're seeing existed along, several years ago or even centuries ago, and we're only now seeing it because of the time it took for the light to come here and touch the, contact the organ here. Not the organ going out there to touch it, but the light coming here to touch it. So there is a time gap. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If the eye perceives through contact, okay, but no, we already said that. Okay, yeah, so distant objects should be just as clear as near objects if the faculty went there and touched them, but that's not true because the distant objects are always fuzzier. Okay, then 3:14, if the eye travels when the form is seen, its movement is of no benefit. Alternatively, it is false to say what it intends to view is ascertained. Okay, so this verse is talking about the purposelessness. If you say the eye travels to look at the form after the form is seen. Okay? If the eye, we were just saying, that the eye doesn't look yeah. Okay, the eye can't go and see look at the object after it's already seen it. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. Yeah. So we were just talking about how the eye can't see it if they contact each other. Okay. So if the eye went to the form after seeing it, its movement would be useless because the form would already have been seen. Okay. Now, this part's interesting. If the eye faculty approached the form which it intended to view, you can't say the form was definitely seen at that time because the eye consciousness was approaching it, was approaching what is to be seen. So it can't see it because it's the object it's going to see. But how can it know what to approach without already seeing it? Okay? So if the eye, if the eye faculty is going to be the agent, and it exists before seeing the object, and yet it travels to where the object is, how is it going to know where the object is if it hasn't already seen it? But if it has already seen it, then it's useless for it to go there and perceive the object because the object's already been seen. Okay? So it would have to approach the object to be seen without seeing it. So it would be like a blind person going to see something, and at that moment, the eye being blind and unable to see the object. Okay? So that's not going to work either. Okay, then verse 3:15. Okay, here, if the eye perceives without traveling, so we just examined if the eye faculty traveled to the object. Now, if the eye perceives without traveling, it would see all these phenomena. For that which does not travel, there is neither distance nor obscuration. Okay, so if it didn't travel to the specific objects, then all objects would be seen if the eye, by its own entity, perceived form without traveling to see it. Okay? So if the eye from its own side was able to see things without having any other conditions be present, then it should be able to see everything, because it sees from its own side through its own power. No other conditions necessary. Okay, so to avoid the previous errors, you might say that the eye perceives form from its own side without traveling to that form. Okay, in that case, the eye, which stays here, would see all phenomena, close and distant, obscured and unobscured. Okay, because there would be no difference in how the eye interacted with close and distant things or with obscured and unobscured things. So it should see everything with all of its details equally. Okay. So previously we refuted the eye faculty going to the object. Now we're saying, okay, it doesn't go to the object, it stays here. Well, if it stays here and it perceives things under its own power, then it should perceive everything. Close and far, obscured, unobscured, because it sees through its own power without having to travel there, without any other conditions necessary. So that also doesn't make sense. Okay, verse 3:16. You have to sit and think about these things, you know? I mean, they're puzzles, aren't they? Yeah. They're Aryadeva's koans, is what they are. Yeah, Aryadeva's a Zen master. They're koans, aren't they? Yeah, how is this going to work? So verse 3:16, if the nature of all things first appears in themselves, why would the eye not be perceived by the eye itself? Okay, so if the eye were the instrument of looking by its own power, then it should be able to see itself. Okay? So just as the scent of a flower is first found in the flower and later spreads to other things, okay? So it's like that with the nature of all things, you know, its essence is there with it and later spreads to other things. So since it can't give up its own nature, even in relationship to itself, then the eye faculty should be an instrument of looking, you know, an eye faculty that it is an instrument of looking from its own side, by its own power, should perceive itself. Okay, so, but the eye doesn't perceive itself, does it? Okay, thus the eye isn't an instrument of looking at form from its own side, because it doesn't look at itself. It's the object. So the object must be what sees. That's not going to work either, is it? Because the object doesn't have consciousness, and it's not a sense organ, and anyway, it's not seeing anything, is it? Okay, so verse 3:17, the eye does not have consciousness, and consciousness lacks that which looks. If form has neither of these, how can they see form? Okay, so this is refuting a combination of three factors as the instrument of looking at the visual form. So Joblo says, the eye alone doesn't have the ability to see form. The form is seen in dependence on a combination of the three factors. Yeah, that sounds good, doesn't it?
Joe was getting it.
Yeah, that's what we're taught when we study mind and awareness, that's how it happens. But remember here, it's happening from its own side, inherently. Okay? So the I, which is the dominant condition, in other words, the condition that is linking the object to the consciousness, is matter, and it isn't conscious of the object. So your eye faculty, your retina and the cones and little doodads there, that's form, that can't see. Okay? Similarly, your brain is form. Your brain can't see either. Okay? So it can't be the object that sees. Consciousness, which is the immediately preceding condition, doesn't look at the object, because if it did, it would already see the object. So it can't be the cause of seeing. Form, the objective condition, is neither that which looks nor consciousness, and it has no ability to see. So if you have three things, none of which have the ability to look at the object or to see the object, then how can the combination of those three things, because it exists by its own side, come to see the object? That's not possible.
So this is Aryadeva's response to Joblo saying that the three of them
Yeah.
there, right?
Right. Well, Joblo is saying that the form is seen on the dependence of the combination of these three. And Aryadeva is saying, but none of the three in and of itself can look at the object. So how can a combination of three non-lookers become a looker? It's like, how can you have three oranges put together and it become an apple? And if you really think about things, whenever you dissect something, you come up with parts that are not it. Or you come up with the causes and conditions that are not it. So how can all these things that are not it become it? If all these things existed from their own side and could not be affected by any other thing. Okay? Yeah, so you really have to sit and think about this, because it seems like, oh yeah, the three come together, the collection of them is how the cognition occurs. But if each of them existed inherently, that couldn't work. Yeah?
If they existed depending arising, they could.
If they existed independently, it could. Yeah? Because each thing would have a certain potential that was activated only when it came into relationship with other things. It didn't have that potential from its own side, or it wasn't doing that activity from its own side. It's kind of like, also, if we look at our body, if we divide our body into parts, there's arms and legs and intestine and kidney and bladder and, eyeballs and brain and nerves and blood and lymph and all that stuff. Are any of them the body? Seen individually, none of them are the body. So they're all antibody, or they're all non-bodies. Okay. Yeah. They're all non-bodies or antibodies. So how could you bring a bunch of non-bodies together and get a body? Yeah. And yet, when you bring all these parts together, and they're arranged in a certain way, then you get a body. But then you see that it can't be a body that exists there in that collection of objects, because none of the parts are a body. So if the body, for the whole collection to be a body, each part would have to be a body, so that you brought them all together, and then you would have a body. Except if each part were a body, you wouldn't have to bring them all together, because each part would be a body. Okay? It's strange, isn't it? But, how is it that all these parts come together and there's a body? How in the world does that happen? It only happens because the mind conceives and gives those things a label. There's nothing from the side of those parts that make it a body. It's only the mind that at that point can be the one that brings them together, and just by the power of term and conception. That's the only thing, just by the power of term and conception. Okay, so it's the same thing here. You have three things that are not the instrument of seeing. Yeah. And yet when they come together, you have the action of seeing. So how in the world does that happen if you have three non-seers, and when they come together in a certain form, you have seeing? Yeah, what's going on there? Yeah, because none of the three things can see. You have three non-seers.
You can't have any things.
Huh?
You're left with no things.
Yeah, you're left with hey, it's kind of like magic in a way, and all you can use to describe it is just dependence. Things depending on each other, and something new arising out of those things coming together. But the seeing itself is totally not findable. And the instrument of seeing is totally not findable. And yet, something sees, and something is seen, and there's seeing. But you can't isolate any of them. Okay? Now this one's interesting, 318. If sound makes a noise as it travels, why should it not be a speaker? Yet if it travels noiselessly, how could awareness arise in relationship to it? Okay, so here we're switching consciousnesses to our auditory consciousness. So this verse is about refuting truly existent auditory objects by examining here in this verse whether sound is a maker of noise. Okay? So just as form can't be seen by its own nature, neither can sound be heard by its own nature. Okay? So when sound is heard, does hearing occur because the sound approaches as an object of that which listens or not? Okay, so when the sound is approaching, is it an object, or is it already an object of the auditory sense and the auditory consciousness, or not? Okay, what's the object of an auditory sense, auditory consciousness? Sound. When sound is approaching, is it actually sound? Because if it's sound while it's approaching, then it's already being heard.
Right.
If it's approaching noiselessly, because it isn't sound yet, then how can it ever be heard? sit with that one. Okay? Huh? When the sound is coming, okay, somebody's speaking, the sound is coming. Is it sound? Is it the object of an auditory consciousness while it's coming? So when the sound waves, somebody hits the bell out there, and the sound waves are coming here. While the sound waves are coming here, is it sound? If it's sound, it should already be heard. If it's not sound,
It can never be heard.
then it can never be heard. Because it's coming noiselessly. So no matter where you were on the path between it and where it originated, you still couldn't hear it. Because it's approaching noiselessly. Because it's not a sound. Okay? So is it a sound before it's heard? Okay, if it goes towards the auditory consciousness, making a noise as it travels, why isn't it the speaker or the maker of the sound? Because it's making the sound. Okay. Okay, so because like a person, it travels emitting sound. So if the sound were emitting sound while it was traveling, then it would be like the speaker. So then it should be a person. Okay. And then also somehow a reliable cognizer should know it and hear it, because it's already sound before it's being heard. That's not going to work. Verse 319. Okay. If sound is apprehended through contact, what apprehends the beginning of sound? If sound does not come alone, how can it be apprehended in isolation? Okay, so this is refuting, by examining whether or not sound is apprehended through contact with the ear faculty, okay? So if sound is apprehended through contact with the ear faculty, what apprehends the beginning of a sound before the contact occurs? In other words, while the sound is still coming to the ear, okay? Yeah, so what's apprehending the sound before, that's the beginning of the sound. The bell is struck way over there. Yeah. I don't hear it till the sound waves reach here. So what is hearing the beginning of the sound of the bell before those sound waves reach me? Okay? So while the sound is still going towards my ear, yeah, it's not a sound because it's not being heard. So nothing would apprehend it because neither the ear nor nothing else can apprehend it. And yet it can't be silent, because if it were a silent bell, you would have silence, and then all of a sudden it would become sound only when it hits your ear. So is it not sound before it hits your ear? It only becomes sound when it hits your ear, which means it was silent before, and then it made noise.
Certainly can't be inherent sound then. It just changed.
Yeah, you can't have something that's silenced before that then becomes noise. And yet you can't say that it was sound before it was heard. So,
Definitely wasn't sound before the bell was struck either.
Yeah, and it can't be sound before the bell was struck. Yeah, clearly that. Okay. So the problem with asserting inherently existent things is you have to be able to point to exactly what they are. Okay? Because they have their own essence. So you should be able to say exactly what the sound is. You know, and when it becomes a sound. Okay? If it inherently exists, because if it has its own nature, it either is a sound or it's not a sound. It either has the nature of sound or it doesn't have the nature of sound. There's nothing else. Okay? But if things are dependently arising, there's no need to be able to isolate exactly what they are, because if I said, I hear a sound, you all understand what I mean. Yeah? If I say, oh, I hear the sound of the bell, everybody understands what I mean. That's conventional language. Yeah? But if things inherently exist, conventional language won't work. Because if things inherently exist, you have to be able to isolate exactly what each and every word refers to. And one word can only refer to one object, and one object can only be referred to by one word, because these things inherently exist with their own nature. And because then the word, you know, the object and the basis of designation would be exactly the same thing. So the sound and the sound waves would be exactly the same. Yeah? So you can see, you know, that when we talk and just use language and don't analyze, we communicate. I heard the sound of the bell. Everybody understands. But if we analyze what is the sound of the bell that is heard, we can't actually identify what the sound of the bell is. Yeah? Our sound waves sound. If they are sound, then they can be heard before they touch the ear. If they aren't sound and they're silent, then how are they ever going to be heard? And what is the bell that's being rung if you start seeing if the bell is inherently existent? And what does it mean to strike the bell? If things inherently exist, you know, what is the action of striking the bell? Is it lifting your arm here? Is it only when the mallet hits the bell? Is that the act of striking? But the mallet hitting the bell is just like that, and it's not something forceful. I mean, if it hit the bell really strong, then that's going to take some time. So then which moment of the hitting of the bell is the striking of the bell? Because when it first touches it, it's very soft. It doesn't have the power to produce a sound. It's only when it hits it a little bit harder, it travels a little bit harder. Yeah? So, you know, when you analyze with ultimate analysis, you can't find any of these things. Yeah? Okay. then the other part where it sound, where it says if sound does not come alone, how can it be apprehended in isolation? That has to do with their idea of sound consisting of 9 substances, 4 of the elements and 5 derivatives, and we won't get into that, okay? Because you know, it would say since sound consists of 9 substances, and since it does not come alone, how can sound in isolation be apprehended? It would follow that smell and so forth, which are inseparably combined with the sound, should also be apprehended, because according to you, they must have contact with the ear organ, just as sound does. Okay, so that has to do with that theory. Okay, verse 320. While sound is not heard, it is not sound. It is impossible for that which is not sound finally to turn into sound. Okay, so Joe Blow says, well, what's wrong if the beginning of the sound isn't heard? Yeah, so if the part of the sound before it reaches you, you know, isn't heard. So Aryadeva says it would not qualify to be sound, because until it's heard, it's not sound. Because like smell, sound isn't the object of the ear before it's heard. Yeah? Smell isn't the object of the ear before it's heard. So sound also isn't the object of the ear before it's heard. Okay, it becomes sound when it's heard. So, but if initially it wasn't sound, but later it became sound, then smell and other things should also be able to later become sound. But this can't happen with permanent functional things. So Aryadeva's rubbing it in a little bit more. It's like, you believe in permanent functional things, so how is the smell going to become a sound? You know? And then they quote a sutra. I don't know, it doesn't say which sutra. For instance, in dependence on the strings and wood and the hand's effort, through these 3 together, sound is produced and issues forth from instruments like the veena and flute. When the wise investigate and think from where it has come and where it has gone, searching in the main and intermediate directions, they find no coming nor going of sound. Okay, so here's another thing. Okay, you have a guitar. Yeah, you have the wood, you have the strings, you have the hand. Yeah? Does the sound exist in the wood, in the strings, or in the hand? It doesn't. Okay? Yeah, the sound is not in that wood. It's not inside the shape of the guitar. It's not in the strings. It's not in the hand. And yet, when those 3 are brought, and it's not somewhere else, because with those 3, you're not going to have, without those 3, you're not going to have the sound of the guitar. Okay. So where is that sound coming from? Yeah, when somebody strums the guitar, where is that sound coming from? Where was it the moment before it became sound? Yeah. Where was that sound the moment before it became sound? And where is that sound? Where does it go to? Where is it the moment after it stops being sound? Because if things have inherent existence, they are there inside themselves, and they can't change because they don't depend on any other factors. So once you had that sound, it should always be there. Yeah, and it could never arise if it were permanent. But where did it exist before it became sound? And where did it go to after it stopped being sound? Because when you look at it that way, it's like the sound came out of nowhere, isn't it? Because we have this idea, here's sound. You know, draw your line around it, here's sound. So if here's sound, yeah, where was it? This thing that is sound, where was it? Before the strings and the wood and the hand came together in a certain way. Yeah, nowhere. Nowhere. There was no sound anywhere. But then, all of a sudden, there was sound where there was nothing before. So it's like the sound came out of nothing. You had no sound, and then sound appeared. That sounds weird. And yet the sound couldn't have existed before you put those three things together. Yeah? I mean, these are things that are very interesting. Sit with them for a while. You know, in your meditation, like, where is that sound? And after it stops being heard, where did it go to? Huh? I mean, really, this is very much like koan's study. Yeah? And, you know, because if things inherently exist, you should be able to find all these things. Okay? So even in the scientific model, what is a sound wave? Can you isolate a sound wave? Is a wave a thing? Can a wave exist without air? No. Is the wave air? No. What is the wave, the sound wave? It's not the air. But it also doesn't exist independent of the air either, does it? So exactly what is a sound wave? And is a sound wave a sound? Yeah. And what does it mean to be a sound wave? And then you start thinking the colors are waves too. It's just they're higher frequency, aren't they, than sound waves. So it kind of makes it sound like if you could slow the waves of the color down, it would make a sound. Yeah? Can you do that?
You made a different thing.
Huh?
I have to read about this thing because it's been so long. I think they're made of different things.
But what is a wave made out of?
You know, that's why I'm sitting here thinking sound waves are pressure waves, and pressure is force over area. So it's like you're pushing columns of air or what?
Yeah, but then is the wave the air?
No, it's lost.
Yeah, you've been...
A friend of mine who has perfect pitch and he's a musician, he tells me that when he hears sounds, he also gets a color with it.
Yeah, and I've heard that too.
Huh.
Two people in a class.
So they'll say, well, D is like mauve and F sharp is bright blue.
Yeah.
Huh.
And they don't shift, you know, that pitch is that color.
Okay.
In class, and they said these two people had perfect pitch, the teacher and a kid in the class, and they they
The sa-
saw the same.
So the people who had perfect pitch saw a color at the same time they heard.
Yeah.
A
That's not
sound.
everyone though, because
Yeah.
outside your has perfect pitch doesn't see colors.
Yeah, but not everybody who has perfect pitch. Yeah.
They're visualizing color in their head or seeing it?
Yeah, which consciousness are they seeing the color with?
I was a Buddhist when I heard this.
Oh, mental consciousness, huh?
And light is a wave or a particle, depending on what you're looking at it as.
Yeah,
with.
that's true. Yeah. Okay. Okay, shall we stop? Huh?
Are you taking questions?
Oh yeah, I can take a few questions.
Oh, okay. This is in relation to the meditation on the parts of the body.
Okay.
Just hearing this, I realized often, you pick apart the parts according to that list, and then I think I'll just think of the parts as inherently existent automatically.
Right.
Right. So we should be going further and thinking of the parts as mutually dependent, or you can't have hit.
Yeah, whenever you are dividing something into parts, you have to also remember that the parts are wholes in conjunction, in relationship to their parts. So something is not inherently a part, and it's not inherently a composite, and it's not inherently a component.
Wow, the meditation will not finish.
Yeah, exactly. And where are you ever going to reach the smallest particle? Yeah. You can't. Uh-huh.
I can't figure out, I guess I have two questions. I can't figure out how the Svatantrika can have their view.
You can't understand how the Tantrika, Sautantrika can have their view.
Svatantrika.
Svatantrika. Yeah.
What we're talking about tonight,
They're Madhyamikas.
right.
Yeah.
So they've read this chapter. So I can't figure out, because everything dissolves when you're looking at it. How could they come up with there being something that didn't just dissolve away?
Yeah, this.
Do they believe in permanent functioning things?
No, the Svatantrikas don't believe in permanent functional things. I've always had this question too, that if the Svatantrikas say the cup is inherently existent and is findable upon ultimate analysis, what are they going to point to as the cup? And it's, none of my teachers have been able to give the answer when I ask like that, because they say actually this analysis is referring really to the self and to the mind, that what are you going to come up with as the self? Yeah, because and to say, yeah, the Svatantrikas come up with the mental consciousnesses of the self. Yeah, and so you can kind of say, oh yeah, I can understand how they come up with the mental consciousness of the self. But if you look at this, and what in the world are they going to point to as the cup? That becomes really difficult when you analyze, what are they going to point to? They really can't point to anything. So I've never really understood the Svatantrikas, how they can make that assertion regarding all phenomena. And I've asked that question and I haven't gotten an answer that satisfied me.
In relation to that last quote about musical instruments and how sound is produced, in the Pali Canon there's the Sutta of the lute. Are you familiar with that? Maybe I'll send it to you and you can see what you think. Because it's a king asking the people, give me just sound. And then they have to explain, no, it's produced in dependence of the lute.
Sure, yeah, of course.
The king takes apart the lute and says, oh, what a sorry object.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Just
Okay.
I've been trying to think all week about what it would be like to not see shape.
Yeah.
So really, we would be blind.
Yeah.
It wouldn't even be patches of color because a patch is still a shape.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So you can't say shape and color are totally unrelated. But you can't say they're the exact same thing either. But again, if things were inherently existent, they would have to be either exactly the same or totally separate. Yeah, so that's what you're coming to. It's like, well, they can't inherently exist. Then we go, oh, yeah. But when you really think of it, you know, we still think of shape and color as very different things. But as soon as you have a shape, you have to have a color. And yet the two things are not the same. Yeah, they depend on each other. Okay.
I had this, this one thought this week about, I think it was talking about last week, the tactile consciousness, and that if it were true that they were inherently different, I'm trying to remember, it was that you would be able to see the color in the dark. If the tactile consciousness.
Yes, if the color and shape were the same, then since you could feel the shape in the dark, you should be able to feel the color in the dark or see the color in the dark too.
Because I was thinking about, there are things that tactily, like you know that if you put your hand over a flame, you're going to get burned. The visual consciousness looking at that flame on the stove would have the same understanding, but it doesn't get to it in the same way.
Yeah.
Just like looking at a needle. Tactily, you know that that's sharp, but if you look at it visually, you know it's also sharp. But it's not from the tactile experience, it's from the information given.
Well, actually, I think because before you know with the tactile experience that the needle is sharp, the visual consciousness will not tell you it's sharp.
So even though I now know that a needle is sharp.
When you were a baby,
I got that tactily.
Yep. You have to get it tactily first, because otherwise, you know, a baby doesn't know. Like a baby would see fire and want to touch it.
Want to get it?
Yep.
Yeah, because it doesn't recognize that that's hot. Because your eye can't see hot.
So you think of all the things in our life like sandpaper and all these things that we know what they feel like when we look at them.
Yeah, but that's our mental consciousness remembering.
The tactile experience.
Yeah, remembering the tactile experience of that object. And it's the value of being able to learn things. Because if we didn't learn, we would have to keep touching the needle and keep putting our hand in the fire. You know, that seeing would not do it for us to warn us of the danger.
And that not having one of our sense faculties, how that influences the experience of the other 5 of them.
Yeah. Like there's certain people who don't have any sense of pain. There's no no sense of pain, and they're constantly hurting themselves.
Yeah, they're very disabled.
Yeah, because they can't look at something and see the potential danger to their body because they've never experienced that. Yeah. And so they could, you know, stick their hand in the flame and maybe they'd smell the burning flesh, but they wouldn't experience any pain. Yeah. And how, you know, one way we think, boy, wouldn't that be nice? But in another way, then you actually wind up damaging your body because the pain is a signal that there's something dangerous there.